Please welcome to the stage Dina Fidas, Managing Director, O&ESummit2022.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Welcome to all of our friends and colleagues in the room, and welcome to the thousands who I know are on the Summit website watching us right now. How has the morning been? Good. Okay. All right. Terrific. Terrific. Well, we are going to have quite an hour together. This hour is deeply meaningful for me, and I think you will find it deeply meaningful as well. You cannot tell the story of O&ESummit2022, of Summit, of LGBTQ workplace inclusion without invoking EY. EY has been a top earner on the Corporate Equality Index for years. EY has had a huge presence here at Summit year over year. EY has led on everything from trans-inclusive healthcare coverage to self-ID. We are all indebted to the envelope-pushing work of EY. And the subheader to this is that today is a day to celebrate when good things happen to good people, or when good people make good things happen. The person that I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming to the stage has over 2.5 decades at EY, and just last year broke many barriers by becoming the first openly gay CEO and chairperson of EY Japan. Moriaki Kida and I have had the pleasure, I've had the honor of sharing many rooms with him over the years, including the last summit in Washington, rooms in Tokyo, where we were discussing everything from gender equality and inclusion to the business case continuing forward. He has been generous enough to offer to tell even more about his story before we begin our fireside. But without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure on behalf of the entire O&ESummit2022 community to welcome you to Las Vegas, to welcome you to Summit, Moriaki Kida. Thank you.
Hi, Dina. Hi, everyone.
Yes, no, you can tell we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed because we know each other. So, Maury, you were kind enough to actually bring some visuals to illuminate the journey that you've been on. But let me first ask, what is it like to be back in a conference room at Summit full of people?
I'm really scared.
Really? Okay. Yes, I think many of us, whether we had a diagnosis or not, are very much in touch with social anxiety, kind of coming out of our COVID shells. Now, the last time I saw you, we were trying to find along the constellation of stars. We were together in Tokyo when we were launching some partnerships to support the marriage equality movement, to get more companies involved. And of course, we were last together in Washington, D.C. All of this before you were appointed last summer as the CEO and chairperson of EY. Let me just pause there and say, how does it feel to occupy that role right now?
Well, first of all, I was selected by our group of partners in Japan to lead the organization last year. And prior to that, about 5 years, I was leading Japan as the COO. So people were familiar with what I was doing. But I was incredibly honored to be selected amongst other candidates. Incredible, and it's been an inspiring, exhilarating year so far.
That's incredible. Now, you are part of many select clubs. The one I want to ask you a question about before we hear a little bit more about what brought you to this stage, what brought you in your career. You are not only an openly gay CEO and chairperson, you're part of the small club that includes Beth Ford, openly lesbian CEO of Land O'Lakes, and Jim Fitterling, openly gay CEO of Dow, both of whom were appointed to those roles right after being the COO. Obviously, that view of the company, the inner workings of the company. And these are two of my favorite people, Beth Ford and Jim, and I know you know them as well. But they've commented that this kind of incredible thing happens when you go from C-suite to CEO. Their email traffic shrunk, the number of no's or challenges to their ideas became yeses and nods. Have you had this phenomenon where upon assuming this highest role in the company, your relationships have changed, or the degree to which people are, wanting to engage in contrary opinions or different ideas. Have you had that same phenomenon happen?
To some degree, yes. And I think everyone, when they make a new role or new level in a company, you might experience something similar, where you're now seen as a very different person who may actually have different responsibilities, and therefore people don't necessarily share everything with you. But I think as a CEO, it almost is a multiple of that, in a sense that people don't necessarily, people think that you're now in the inside, or I'm now on the inside. I'm the decision maker. And so they only want me to hear things that are good, not necessarily things that are not going well. They want to kind of alter the information sometimes to suit what they want to be approved, rather than for me to see the whole picture to determine what's right or wrong. So I think those are things that I've kind of learned. I guess it's a leadership skill to dig further to understand the whole picture in the new role.
Could you actually expand a little bit more? As a leader, how do you encourage candor, even if your direct reports are thinking this isn't a message you necessarily want to hear? How do you actually create that level of maybe psychological safety in which people are going to share their honest assessments of next steps or of recommendations?
I think, growing up at EY, for 27 years now with the firm, I've seen many different leadership styles. There were the old school, very dominant, masculine type of male leaders, and I've seen a lot of other types of leaders who were very vulnerable. And when the leader is really vulnerable or questioning in a meeting, people tend to also are able to open up and ask questions, or to challenge some ideas. I also start meetings with a question rather than a direction of where I want to go, so that I don't set a preconceived notion of where maybe Mori wants to go, or even bring out a contrary view at the beginning in a meeting or any discussion, so that some people might think, oh my gosh, Mori might be thinking this way. So some people might try to support that and have more of a discussion going on, rather than everybody supporting one idea that they think I have. So yeah, psychological safety is a really important concept that I consistently think about.
Absolutely. Now, I think what everyone is very much wanting to hear as we talk about authenticity in the workplace and candor is your journey. It is just extraordinary to be able to announce an openly gay CEO in Japan. Can you talk more about your journey of what brought you here to being an out professional to being a leader?
Sure. So I prepared some slides just so that you have visual for information, because you only see me as I am today. But perhaps if we can, are the slides
and
up?
Word to the wise, if someone asks a question and your first thought is, let me present a deck, you are in fact CEO material. So thank you, Mori. I mean this, for us to be able to really see this picture. So yeah, well, let's tee up that PowerPoint real fast. Super.
So I will jump to 2005, when I actually attended my first O&Equal conference. And the picture seems a little bit dated, but it is, 17 years ago. It's quite a long time ago. It was right after I decided to come out at EY before becoming a partner. And our LGBT leader, Chris Crespo, is in the back right next to me. And she is here today still. Many people actually in this picture have retired since then. But Chris, I want to thank you for supporting me still today. And jumping back to a surprise picture of when I was born. I was born in an era where color photos were very expensive. So of course, my 0-year-old picture is black and white. And my birthday picture on the right, I think I was 2, but only in Japan would you have raw oysters served at the front on a birthday, right? Then going into my teens, I moved to the United States when I was 8. You know, in Japan, we didn't really have any opportunities to take family photos like that, but I think my dad won some sort of raffle. And so we took that picture on the left. And my dad and I with our cat in our living room when I was in high school. And contrary to this, I guess, somewhat of a smile that I have in that picture, I was really close to committing suicide at that point. You know, in the 80s, and when I was 16, HIV was just named HIV. It was still called gay-related immunodeficiency before then. And you know, I really didn't know what I would call myself, but I knew I was different, and it was a really tough time. But because of the people who are, you know, fighting for our rights before my time, that I was able to come out, be supported by my school teacher in Los Angeles, who basically told me I am okay to be who I am. I didn't know what that meant. But, and this was about a year after I came out to my father, who had told me that he would disown me and that I'm no longer his son, a reconciliation which took about a year. And so, you know, I'm still really grateful for my parents, who's already deceased, but who had, after a year or so, really accepted me for being who I am. And here is me graduating from high school and then college on the right side. Don't compare me with how I look today. But by this time in high school, I was starting a peer counseling program, which really did not exist in my high school yet, but really looking to help students who were from various backgrounds. In LA, you can imagine, even by that time, in my high school, the Caucasian population was only about 50, and 30% was Asian, and the other 20 were others. So we had a lot of ethnicity-related first generation, second generation issues that we dealt with the peer counseling group. Very proud to have started that group with a school counselor. And then I graduated college with a music degree in piano. And this kind of turns into my profession, because at this point I was really thinking about pursuing music or something else. And you know, it was still a time back then that I felt really insecure about my future, being a gay man and also an Asian man in the United States. And thinking that I perhaps should go after a license or something that I can fall back on, that's something that I could always keep as a professional strength. So after speaking to my dad about what I should do, I decided to study to become a certified public accountant. And after graduating from the university with a music and piano performance degree, I went to study business in graduate school. And then, obviously, the same picture you saw out in Equal, it took me almost 10 years to come out at EY. Although I was really active in the LGBT student group in school, as you know, even today, the statistics show that more than 30% of the people in the United States go back into the closet when they join a workforce. In Asia, it's more than 60 to 70% of people that go back into the closet once they join a company. And I was just reminiscing some of my memories from 1990s when I joined EY. I moved from California to New York to join EY, and back then there was something called America Online, if you're old enough to know that. And you could make anonymous chat groups. And I created a chat group for big 6 accounting firms right when I joined EY, and saw various people in the industry to talk about LGBT topics. And I still remember at the height of it, I might have had 40 or 50 people who joined the group to chat. But all of us were talking about how afraid we were to come out at work, as we were seeing people being fired just for being gay or coming out in the workplace. So, and I was told when I, very early on joining EY from a gay manager, that I come to know that I have 2 things against me, which was being Asian and gay, and so that I would have to work twice as hard. I'm sure you've all heard this before. And so I didn't want to have that, apparent weakness affect my career, and that's why it took me a long time to decide to come out. Then there was a newsletter at EY in 2004 that was sent out all over, and by that time I had moved to San Francisco. And you would think in San Francisco it would be really easy to be out, but I wasn't. And the newsletter was sent by the same Chris Crespo that I showed you, enlisting volunteers across the United States at EY to start a chapter of LGBT employees. And I stopped for a moment and thought, what should I do? And to your point, I was already starting to lead teams of over 30 or 40 sometimes. And when some of my members would come to me about their career issues or personal issues, it was becoming untenable for me to keep myself closeted. Because I couldn't give examples of how I personally overcame some of those issues. I also wanted people to know how happy I was being gay and living together with my partner, but I wasn't able to do that. So I think to your point on authentic leadership, I really thought this was a time for me to come out. I also was up for partner, which some of you may know in accounting law firms. It's a really big step, and I thought becoming a investing partner in the firm, I didn't want people to wrongly think that I got the role because I was in the majority except for my ethnicity. I also thought that I won't be able to go back and face myself if I wasn't out. So that's what really made me decide to come out. And after that is kind of the journey. But in 2016, I moved to Tokyo to lead as the COO of the Japan practice. Right before that, I was fortunate enough to get married. The one on the left side is a ceremony that we had outside of London in the UK, as my partner is British. And where he was working in France, I was visiting back and forth, having based in London. So I think that's my picture slides. But it's not the typical CEO slides with statistics and numbers.
It's not, and this is why it was just a round of applause for such beautiful, for this, it takes such a generosity. There's so much generosity to you. From my first encounter with you, you exude such authenticity and warmth and compassion. I also, if I may, I can see that Chris Crespo is tearing up over there. I can already see that Chris, who behind many coming out stories, is Chris Crespo, in addition to the EY story. So I can see the admiration that you inspire with your colleagues. If I may, because you shared so much, I think we talk a lot about you breaking barriers, being, well, let me first ask you, do you consider yourself bicultural?
Yes, probably
Yes.
multicultural, yes.
Multicultural. Being a multicultural out CEO in Japan, I would like to also both thank you and acknowledge the additional barriers you've broken by speaking so openly about your mental health and your journey, having been on the precipice of suicide. And I think it continues to be remarkable to me how many stories, summit after summit, an LGBTQ person comes to a crossroads and thinks, well, I either will live life to the fullest, meaning who I know myself to be, or I can't live this life. And I think that's at times a hard concept for non-LGBTQ folks to completely understand sort of the suffering that can happen. May I just ask, what is it like to even acknowledge that part of your story today? Does it feel so almost like another lifetime ago, or does it still feel close to the surface in terms of the feelings and the emotion around it?
It's really close to me. I still can feel the desperation that I felt when I was contemplating suicide, and I'm sure many of you can. It's really the feeling that you cannot escape from where you are, that there is nothing that you can see outside of where you are, and there's no one that can help you. That's really kind of the sense that I had. There were only a few times like that in my life that I felt that way, and some people might feel that a lot more, yeah, it's still real. But you know, I want to bring back to O&ESummit because the number of times that I've joined you and you know this organization, it's really inspired me. The speakers that you have had has given me the energy to continue and also to inspire others where I can. So this really is an incredible opportunity for everyone, and I hope that you all bring things back. But I think the multicultural aspect and the need for us to consistently come out, it's a real emotionally draining thing for us to have to do. When I moved to Japan in 2016, you know, I had resisted moving back. I'm sure some of my EY colleagues would say, "You went back to Japan?" Because of the LGBT aspect of it, and then also because of the fact that I was no longer seen as pure Japanese, having grown up in the U.S. And many, you know, people who's grown up here as first generation know that there is almost a reverse rejection when you go back to your home country. So there was a big resistance inside of me built over a long time about going back. And that's why I kind of feel like I'm gay, I'm Asian, I'm Japanese American, and so I feel multicultural in that perspective. So when I went back to Japan, I actually had to decide if I was going to be out. And my biggest fear was that for being in such a high position in a company, it wasn't really about me having to explain or to come out to people, but I might be putting my other partners or employees at the risk of having to explain why they have a CEO who is, or COO who is gay. Why would you allow something to happen? Or our clients may not want to have business with us because they have we have a LGBT leader. And so I really thought about the effect on the business in the environment that we operate, which was in Japan or Asia Pacific, which is not the same as in the United States or some other Western countries. So those are things that I kind of thought about with regards to multicultural aspect.
And you know, if you go to the EY website and look at the profile on Mori, you will see such a clear centering of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the DEI breakthroughs that you've observed have happened at EY, either in recent times since you assumed the chairperson CEO role or just before that. What are some of the things that you think EY is really breaking new ground on, particularly in Japan or the broader APAC region?
I think it's really different around the world what DE&I stands for. So in the U.S., as you know, even with the George Floyd incident, there's a lot of emphasis on ethnicity. There's a lot of emphasis on gender. Maybe so much so that LGBT is not always the main thing that CEOs talk about, and amongst disability and other things. Asia Pacific, it's only really about gender at the moment, just on the average, except for maybe Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand, and some of the Pacific Islands, which it has a very different ethnicity and diversity mix. But at EY, I think what we've been successful is to embed D&I in the culture. And, you know, every company has started D&I initiatives through a human resource policy and making policies that are fair to everyone in the company, including LGBT. So DE&I sat very close to or inside of human resources. And we kind of talked about this a little bit. Whereas EY has had early on moved this into more of a strategy and purpose-related level. So it's not at underneath HR, but it's at this level of a corporate strategy. Our global chairman has brought D&I committee to that level to make sure that everything has a side prong. Everything we do in the business has this D&I aspect being checked and also ensured that it's spearheaded. So same thing in Asia Pacific, where we are trying not to talk about D&I as if it's a silo, a separate thing that we do, but that it's part of our culture, and everything we do, from promotions to new policies on business or client acceptance, we think about diversity and inclusion.
Now, going back specifically to Japan right now, because there's a drumbeat. We think towards marriage equality, and a coalition of businesses that have been organized by friendly chambers of commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and others. And I'm curious, what do you think as you look ahead to the path of accomplishing full legal equality for the LGBTQ community in Japan, what do you see the role of the private sector being?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, because I think you all have the power in this. As business leaders, we deal a lot with our local politicians and political groups. We deal also with other companies and also NPOs, NGOs. And these three, the politicians, the corporations, and the supporting NGOs and NPOs, these are three groups that really have to work in tandem. And I remember this chat that Vice President Biden had when he was a vice president under the Obama administration in Davos.
Yes.
And he mentioned that, there might be impatience as to what the government is doing and what the government can say. The politicians have their hands tied due to local population that they support. But if corporations push far enough, then politicians will have the energy and the support to enable them to make these legislative actions. And so he was, in fact, trying to give us corporations kind of a direct ask for us to action more. And so I kind of think of that a lot, even in Japan, where actually the population supports equal marriage all the way from 70 years on down. Majority people actually support gay marriage in Japan.
Wow.
And that's really remarkable. I think 80% of the population actually support it. But it's really the politicians, due to certain reasons, cannot necessarily make that move yet. So I'm trying to create a coalition of companies and C-suites, because again, D&I is not really about a silo, but it's about a culture, that each company can spearhead this, including LGBT, so that the government politicians feel that they have air cover to be able to make legislative actions.
Now, we didn't necessarily plan on a few of these questions, but I'm going to ask them, and you can say pass or you can go with it. But you have made such an impact in spaces like this at Out and Equal in sharing your story. And I'm wondering, in your role as CEO, do you find yourself telling your own story a lot, or is it typically something that happens in these select spaces, whether it's a diversity, equity, and inclusion space or an LGBTQ space? Maybe the bottom line is, do you think your peers or those in your closest circle at work know as much as those of us now in this room?
Oh, really good question. I don't know if my peers or my EY Japan people know me as much as sometimes people who attend these conferences. But I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a real introvert. And I read a lot of books about leaders who are introverts because I am not used to speaking up on stage. I'm getting used to it, but just like I got used to playing the piano on stage. I also don't have a concept of being an inspiring person for others. I just try to share my stories so that people don't, just like I mentioned to you about psychological safety, that you can be a real average normal person like me and still become a CEO. I think that's the reason why I kind of tell a lot of my own stories, and to make people feel at ease and safe, that you all have the ability and the I guess what is really inside of you to make the world a different place. So I don't really do it because I think I'm an incredible achiever, but I try. I continue to just do what I think I can and to make people feel safe.
Thank you, Mori, for saying that. And I think that every time you share more about your journey, there are people whose lives are literally changed who may never even be able to tell you that because it's 5 or 10 years later. There is a Japanese-American mom watching this right now, and perhaps in 10 years, when her son comes out to her, this would have implanted in her mind, this is our story. This is who we are too. And I think every time we tell our stories, we actually are opening doors for people that we may never meet or they may never hear about the impact that we had. I had a very candid conversation with a colleague of mine about what it was like to be Asian American during the AIDS crisis in the United States. And because of, in some part, racism of white America and some, sort of social separation that was occurring, there were even rumors and misconceptions that being Asian American, you were actually almost naturally incubated from HIV and AIDS, which wasn't the case. But the outreach was not happening as much. The outreach, the health education and treatment was not happening as much in major US cities with the LGBTQ Asian American community. And so, representation matters. It sounds like it's a bumper sticker, but it's so much more than that. It's I think for many people, I'm seeing nods. It's the first time that people are saying, yes, I see myself in that person. There's a familiarity here that I can relate to. Something that you just mentioned again, which has always intrigued me about your background, is your love of music, and that you actually have an undergraduate degree in music. And you still play for charity events, is that right? May I ask, well, 2 questions. 1, do you still play music alone? And 2, are there pieces of music that give you particular comfort or inspiration?
Very difficult question to answer. Well, the first part is easy. Yes, 95% of the time I play music alone because it's a time of the day that as an introvert, you know that you actually get you get more energy by being alone than being with others. But piano and sitting down in front of the piano and thinking about the music is something where I get a lot of energy from. In addition to, I do Chinese calligraphy. So those are 2 things that I do alone a lot when I do have time. What music? That's really tough. I listen to both classical and non-classical, but if I had to say classical, Schubert is one of my favorite composers, because if you know anything about Schubert's music, he uses minor and major chords in a really interesting way. And for me, for my life has been positive, negative, where I'm depressed or I'm really excited, and it kind of melds into each other. And his music seems to reflect who I am the most. And it's just the way he coordinates these chords are incredible. So.
What has been on repeat in my ears is the soundtrack to Succession, which is by a modern a modern composer, but it's a lot of minor and major chord interplays, and it's both soothing and energizing. As I saw these incredible photos of you as a young man, it's 2022. You are in this role. You have a partner. You have this extraordinary life. What would you tell 15, 16-year-old Mori about the path ahead?
I thought a lot about this question because I could tell him a lot of things, but I don't know if that person who is so desperate would listen to me. Because the easiest thing is that it'll be all right, and look, you're here, 40 years later, and you're really okay, and you didn't have to die, or that society has accepted you. But I'm not sure how easily imaginable that would have been to my 15 or 16-year-old self. But without being able to answer that question, that is why I spend time with the charities that I do that are mostly targeted to students in elementary school, because I think that's when you start thinking about your sexual orientation or attraction to others, and really vulnerable because there still are not enough role models. And we're all minority in certain ways and majority in certain ways, right? So there is no such person as a only majority person. And so I try to find what are your minority sides. Even when I'm in Japan, we're 97% of the population of Japanese, and over 70% of the workforce is male. I talk to my male Japanese colleagues who seem just a majority, and when you start digging down to their stories, you find a lot of aspects that are minorities, whether they have hidden disabilities or they have familial situations that they can't share with others. And it's incredible when they're able to share that with others, and how open they become to supporting all other kinds of difficulties, inequity that people face each day in the workforce or in life. So I've been focusing at EY Japan on the majorities, minority stories. I would tell my 16-year-old or 15-year-old self that everybody has a minority side. And I'm working, and you will be working 50 years from now, trying to bring that minority self for everyone to be okay in the world.
That's a very, very hopeful message. Let me also ask, because, during COVID, Japan actually led with having a minister overseeing mental health. Have you observed that the public conversation in Japan has changed significantly in the last few years, and has it penetrated the workplace? In other words, is there a sense that it is now okay to speak more openly about challenges, be it with depression or anxiety, in a way that perhaps it wasn't 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
Oh, I would think so. I'm not sure how it relates to COVID situation, but it may have helped in that, because certain people can't get vaccinated if they have, they might have adverse effects due to their medical conditions. So people became more open about those conditions. Also, I think early on in the pandemic, there was embarrassment of being converted or being positive for COVID. But people, I think that may have helped. But over years, in Japan, at least in the mental illness side, there's been a real progress about people being able to be out at work.
And what are you observing of the younger generations of workers that are now, swelling the ranks in terms of their openness? What jumps out to you day to day as you observe, the entering CPAs and those, who are in their 20s as you were when you first joined EY?
Yeah, millennials are millennials everywhere, I guess. But I guess, what's really, as a CEO, what I have noticed is that our people, the younger generation, are not really attached to companies, but they're attached to ideals or purpose of what the company does. And they're always watching to make sure what we're speaking as what we're doing in terms of purpose or the values of the company. So in fact, at EY in Japan, we lead all of our recruiting conversations with our purpose of building a better working world, and what can you do in that aspect? Because I really think that purpose and the long-term value that companies can bring to society is what really excites people and actually creates innovation in companies and brings companies to the next level.
I want to actually also revisit a piece here and extend it a bit, which is you started to talk about how unique DEI is in Japan. And for a lot of our companies, there's this tension. Well, there are two layers of tension. One is a lot of the DEI still originates from the North Atlantic, United States, Western Europe. And then for those multinationals that are truly global in nature, they will have a regional strategy, but it's an APAC strategy. And to unpack that is to say, okay, what's our strategy for one of the most diverse, pluralistic regions of the world? Oh, and by the way, the team will be headquartered in Singapore with jurisdiction everywhere from Jakarta to Tokyo to Shanghai. And so what are some insights that you have into how to translate what appears to be a tension in how DEI originates and is implemented and actually transform that into an opportunity for change moving forward?
So there is a very fundamental value difference between the East and the West. And that is the emphasis on the individual in the West versus individual on the community in the East. And I don't really mean this as one is better or the other. But in the United States growing up, individual freedom of expression, these are really important values that are adhered in the society. So people have rights to say what they feel. And sometimes you get to the point of, well, is this almost defamation to say it so loudly, or is it still acceptable? So we're always, I think, in the West, or especially in the US, trying to think about the individual rights and the rights for expression or how you live your choice. Whereas in the East, it's about harmony, and it's not about the individual, but about what the group or the team or the community feels. And when it comes to DE&I, I think there's a similarity there. So the template that you might develop in the West on how you advance DE&I is because it's based on individual strength and freedom and expression, and you bring it to the East, it creates so much tension. And actually, people who would be for DE&I would say, oh, I don't want to express who I am, or I don't want all that. And so there's a fundamental difference on the way you approach D&I from the community and harmony perspective versus ensuring that every person has the right to exist in the way he or she or they would like to be. So that needs to be calibrated. And then the second part is EY and NYU did a study on how we approach DE&I in different environments. For example, places like Brunei, where they might have still very severe penalties for acting in LGBT capacity. We might try to, as a corporation, adhere to when in Rome model, which means to have to adhere to a lot of local laws and customs. And then embassy, where another layer above, maybe countries like Singapore and in Asia, you might be able to do a lot more than adhere to local laws and customs, but to create an embassy where when you're within the company, or people can run into your company to feel safe. And then advocacy, which might be countries like the US, Japan, where we advocate as corporations to help other companies or governments to act positively.
Indeed, and for those, if you want to look it up, it's in the Global Hub that we house at O&ESummit2022. It is a very, very helpful framework that was done in partnership with Kenji Yoshino, another esteemed Japanese-American in business. I want to ask you one more question before we turn it to our audience for, we have just shy of 15 minutes, and that is, what is giving you the most hope right now? As you look ahead, the trajectory of inclusion, social inclusion, economic inclusion of the LGBTI community, what gives you the most hope?
People like you and people like you.
Oh.
No, it's true. And I think you all deserve a round of applause for this. Because, we think of large corporations or large NPOs or famous politicians for making big changes. But it's really each of you who have voiced something when you might not have felt safe to do so. That's really making the difference, and that's really giving me hope that you still exist and you're still sharing your best practices with each other and bringing things that can be modeled into other countries and other places. And that's, I think, what really gives me hope.
Thank you so much. We have two individuals in the room with microphones. If you have a comment or a question. Oh, thank you. We have a few more. Okay, terrific. We've got a hand raised right over here to start us off. Thank you.
Here you are.
Hi, my name is Song, and I'm from South Korea. And seeing a person like you, from a country where we share a lot of kind of same culture, it's really incredible. And I wish I had somebody like you when I was there, because I made a decision to come here a few years ago. Living my authentic self was not really something that I couldn't imagine doing that. So my question is, when you were making that decision of going back to Korea, what was your thought process? Because you talked about you kind of hesitated and there was like second thoughts. So what made you to, I don't know why I'm like getting emotional, but
Me too.
yeah, but like what was your sort of what was your thought process, and did you feel sort of a sense of mission in your decision making?
Yeah, I felt like when I moved to Japan in 2016 that I was in a position of power, being the COO. And maybe this is a Western concept that I brought back to Japan, but I feel that people of power have privilege. And people with privilege has responsibility to society. And so So I thought, of course, it might put at risk some of our people. So I actually consulted with our EY Japan, other leaders of EY Japan. And fortunate enough, all of them said, no, in fact, this will be good for EY, but it's also going to be good for society. So I was blessed with wonderful colleagues, and that's why I decided to come out. And in fact, at EY, I've helped start EY Korea, the LGBT group there. I spoke to their leader about the need to do it, and so I think it'll spread. It'll take time, but it'll spread. And I know when I was coming out, they told me, well, in Japan, there are no gay people. And then my best Korean friend's mother said, well, we don't have gay people in Korea, but we know that's not true.
Thank you for your sharing in that question. We have a question in the center here. She's coming. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Corey. I work for Cliff Bar in Twin Falls, Idaho. I wanted to ask about the kind of parallel that might exist in the moment where you were considering the impact on your business of coming out and what that might do to potential customers or business partners and things like that, and how that might be similar for people who, like myself, come from a company that's in a very regressive state, and where implementing a DEI strategy might also have that effect. So my question is, did you see those effects in your journey? And if you did, how did you combat them?
So what I was afraid of are actual things that have happened in the past for companies. When I think it was Indonesia, but when a Japanese company called Panasonic decided to implement a D&I open strategy, there was a no buy Panasonic movement. And so it actually hit the top line and the bottom line. And so companies can be really skittish about the speed in which they might communicate to community. So I would encourage even maybe EY might be in your neighboring state, or that might be able to share with you what has been okay or what has been acceptable. But in Japan, when I first moved there and started to do a lot of activities, I really looked at that. So that's the embassy and advocacy model I talked about has description of how you might be able to do that in a gradual way so that it doesn't necessarily give a severe adverse effect on business. But to talk about the positive side, I was afraid about the negative impact on the business when I came out. But suddenly I was able to talk to the CEOs. I mean, as I did have this privilege of being a CEO to be able to talk to other CEOs. But other CEOs were reaching out to me to want to talk to me about how I'm doing this, or how our company's working through D&I issues. And so there was sudden connectivity with other businesses, which has been an incredible journey for me to grow in my CEO position. So I'm sure your company can also, and your employees can also have benefits from taking certain actions. Please reach out to us if you need any help.
Thank you for that question. Are there additional questions or comments? Okay, we'll get you a microphone. Bear with us one moment. Just in the second row here.
Hey, my name's Joshua Carlisle. I'm with EY. First off, just want to say I absolutely adore your story. It is a true testament of resiliency. And EY and the impact that you've made at EY is very pertinent in my life, and figured I would share this briefly before my question. So you said something. When a lot of people get into the workforce, they go back into the closet. And I had that same experience where when I graduated college, I went to the workforce, I went back into the closet, and I was looking for a resource. I'm proud to say I actually ended up becoming that resource and started our ERG group at my previous firm, which then sponsored me to be at O&ESummit2022, where I met EY, and that's why I'm here today. So I actually got recruited in. So I really love this firm, and I just want you to know from where it was in DC 3 years ago, in a place where I felt like I was trying to pave a path that I didn't really see in my own firm at the time. Like company culture like EY, Bank of America, and so many others here became that family for me. So thank you for everything you did to cultivate, and Chris and everybody here. This is incredible. Please stand up as well. She says no.
Yes.
Anyway, you have a testament of resiliency, and really at a global scale with your role as CEO EY Japan. And I'd love to hear about some ways that you continue to remain resilient, as there's so many differing perspectives for other countries where EY has business and office footprint as well. What is a recent example of resiliency that you're still working to overcome?
Is that my personal issue or more of a company?
Within EY or personally, however you choose.
I will share one that was something Chris and I have worked on recently, which is, we operate as a global company, and many of you, may work for a global company. And there might be certain LGBT-related topics that you want to share with all of the employees around the world. And we have approximately 365 people at EY around the world. And unfortunately, some of these things, I did an interview of I guess our number 4 guy globally called Jay Nibby about 3 months ago. And the video was supposed to be out for the Pride Month. And it was disseminated with help of Shane over there, who helps me with a lot of things, to almost all countries, except certain countries in Asia Pacific and certain countries in Middle East and Africa. And certain leaders in those countries, and I'm really sharing you our dirty laundry because I'm proud of what happened afterwards. But there was this resistance because they were not sure how people in those regions would take it. And maybe to the question earlier, how it might negatively impact. But we worked through our leaders, discussions with our leaders, and we got it out in, I think, almost all regions. So there's things like these hurdles that come up all the time, especially related to LGBT in certain countries. But discourse or discussions is really important, to be engaged all the time and not necessarily to reject because it's too hard or too difficult. Hopefully that was helpful.
I think we have time for one more question or comment. Okay, just in this third row here.
Hi there. Thank you so much for taking the time today. My name is Patrick, and I work at a company called eStill. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story, because I am also an Asian American, younger individual, and I felt a lot of parallels between your story and also just my life in general. I have a question that pertains to our company specifically. So we're a relatively smaller company, around 500 people, in a more conservative industry, real estate. And I was wondering, as a younger individual, at a company without any existing ERGs or, in a relatively new diversity initiative and council, how would you suggest, someone at my position to be able to help talk to executives and leaders at my company that maybe don't represent or have experienced my kind of background or who I am or understand that, and allow them to maybe open their eyes to introducing DEI to more of the, the business itself, when maybe innovation also isn't like a huge thing. It's real estate. It's meat and potatoes. You don't really innovate too much. So was wondering to hear if you have any ideas. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I can spend some time afterwards to share ideas. But overall, when you have a small company, it's really hard to get that conversation with those people at the leadership level. So I would try to build relationships outside that can help that conversation happen. But how do you do that might be through some organizations like O&EQual or other not-for-profits. But I might have some ideas that we can talk about. Thank you. I know because of time.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Well, Moriaki, I think we saw in this moment that I think most of us felt the tears come, because that is the direct impact that you have. There's a multiplier effect when you live your truth, when you lead with such strength, and there's such power in your authenticity. And I think we see the transformation in this room. I know that there's more to come in terms of the circles of your impact. And we are deeply, deeply grateful for the leadership that you continue to show, for being a friend to O&EQual. And so thank you so much. It's also worth sharing that Moriaki had just 24 hours to be here, and he prioritized that in his travel. And so thank you, truly, thank you so much on behalf of all of O&EQual. Thank you.